Well, today we have the pleasure of being joined by Armand Mitchell, the son of iconic Canadian author W.O. Mitchell. Armand Mitchell has not only followed in his father's literary footsteps, but has adapted his biography, his dad's biography, into a captivating play. And we are here to delve into the world of this remarkable play and gain insights into what it was like growing up with such a prominent literary figure. Welcome, Armand, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you.
So, Armand, can you maybe start off by telling us about the inspiration behind your play called Magic Lies and what audiences can expect from it at the premiere? I guess it already premiered, didn't it?
Yes, it did on Friday. That's right. Great opening. The guy who plays it is wonderful. The way it started was the last book that my father did was An Evening with W. O. Mitchell, and it was a collection of 31 pieces. My wife and I selected and edited them, worked with him on it, and wrote little intros to each one. And when that came out in 1997, a couple of drama stage people came to us and they wanted to adapt it and do a one-man show and recreate An Evening with W.O. Mitchell in the tradition, for example, of Mark Twain Tonight. And so that's where it got its start. And its finish was at Rosebud on Friday the 15th with a wonderful opening.
Okay, so that was the opening, was the 15th. How long does it run at Rosebud through October,
It's
right?
going it's going to run from the 15th. Well, run from now until October the 21st. There was 31 productions.
Excellent. Okay. And Rosebud Theater, of course, is so cute and it's kind of nestled in that little corner of Alberta there. And I think that's the only place it is playing right now, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so your father, W.O. Mitchell, was a renowned Canadian author. So, how has his legacy influenced your own creative pursuits, including this play?
Well, he had a major influence on my life. Not an overpowering and smothering one. He was a wonderful teacher. And in fact, he considered himself throughout his life a teacher. He taught in high schools in his early career, and then he taught creative writing programs all over Canada. And he had a major impact on my aesthetic likes and dislikes. I went on to be a university professor and teach English literature. And on a number of courses, I taught some of his books, in fact. So he had a pretty profound impact on me.
I can imagine. So, what was it like growing up with him as your father? Can you share maybe many like memorable anecdotes or lessons that he imparted to you about storytelling and literature?
It was exciting. Never a dull moment. He loved telling stories, and he always had experiences that he would immediately turn into a story. And I remember, well, storytelling was a pretty major part of our family around the kitchen table. And I remember on one occasion, Barb and I were in England, and she was doing her PhD at Leeds. And my mother and father, this is in 1991, and my mother and father came over to visit. And we did a trip up north. And then when we came back, 10 o'clock at night, it was late, the phone rang. Barb comes down to answer the phone. And W was upstairs, and you understand he's in his late 70s now. I mean, it's not all that well. And the phone person on the other end of the phone says, "This is the Prime Minister's office calling." And Barb thought, "Oh, that's Jeff, our son, and he's pulling a joke." And she almost told him. And then she said, "Well, maybe it is." So she called up. W got out of bed, came downstairs, and we hear this conversation. And yes, the Prime Minister of what country? And Brian and I are looking at each other. And then the next is, "Oh, Brian, how are you?" "I'm fine, Brian. How are you?" He's on the phone with Brian
Brian
Mulroney.
Mulrooney. Oh my gosh.
Brian Mulroney has phoned to ask him if he would accept become a member of the Privy Council of Canada, which is the highest honor that you can receive. It's above the Order of
What?
Canada. And
Wow.
so W says, "Well, yes, but You better talk to my wife. And so
Of
mom
course.
comes back,
He's a
and
very wise man, very
that's
wise man.
hear this voice on the other side of the phone saying, yes. Well, no, there's no way we can do that. And they were asking him to come back right away to do this.
Oh
And
my
so when
goodness.
W got back on the phone, Brian Mulroney said, "There's the voice of authority." And
Yes.
for the rest of his life, we always joked with W because one of his stories it's in the play is when some kids blow up Melvin's grandpa in the back house. And so we said, "Well, it's no wonder that you were made a member of the Privy Council because you know all about privies."
Oh gosh, so funny. It just sounds like such a hoot growing up under his roof and beyond. Because, yeah, it sounds like the stories continued into well into his later years. And of course, W.O. Mitchell is celebrated for his distinctive Canadian voice in literature. So, how do you think that his works have contributed to the Canadian literary landscape?
Well, it's really interesting. I think he was the first, if not the first, to put Canadian Prairie and Alberta foothills on the literary map.
Wow.
In fact, when Jake and the Kid, the collection of short stories, came out in 1961, Margaret Lawrence wrote a review, and she was a very excited review about this. He's writing about us, and she made the point that there were actually gophers in some of these stories, and there were details of the Canadian landscape. And she said he gave us license to write about ourselves, and I think that was true.
Yeah, well, you just mentioned it right there, the landscape. So, like, because his storytelling often showcased prairie landscape and the human condition. So, how do you think that your play now, Magic Lies, draws or pays homage to those themes?
Well, Magic Lies opens with W.O. talking about the prairie. He says something like, "I was born a gopher, and I think I'll probably die a gopher." And it ends with a passage from Who's Seen the Wind, which is a wonderful lyrical prose about prairie. And it's interesting, though, that he wrote about prairie, he wrote about foothills people, but his stories, he made them travel. They're universally, internationally known. There's a Chinese translation of Who's Seen the Wind that came out about 8 years ago. There's a South Korean, there's Ukrainian. Um, in fact, with the Chinese translation, the woman who did it, she had picked up Who Was Seen the Wind. She was in Toronto. She picked it up in the library. She started reading, and she couldn't put it down because it took her back. The prairie landscape took her back to the Inner Mongolian steppes. So there's a story that jumps.
Right? Jumps the ocean. It resonates with people beyond just Canada. Well, okay,
Yeah.
so Who Has Seen the Wind, one of his most famous novels. Are there other notable literary works that have maybe had an impact on Canadian literature and culture?
Yes, I think there are. I think his top three, the novels that will go on, are Who Has Seen the Wind, which has now sold well over 1 million copies just in Canada alone. The other one is a kind of a bookend one. It's called How I Spent My Summer Holidays. And it's almost as if the character Brian, young Brian in Who's Seen the Wind, grew up. He's now an adolescent. And it's a slightly darker book, but it's a very powerful book. And then the other one is The Vanishing Point. And The Vanishing Point is particularly relevant today because it is about his experience. It's built on his experience with the Stoney Nakoda at the Eden Valley Reserve. He taught out there for a year in the early 50s, and he wrote this novel about red and white relationships. And the vision in that novel is so relevant today. Vanishing Point's been out of print for about 10 years, but Freehand Books, Calgary publisher, is going to bring out a new edition sometime in the next year.
Isn't that interesting? And you mentioned the other one, how I spent my summer holiday. Almost sounds like a kid's book report or something, or
That's
like
right.
an essay when they get back to school and grade 5 or something. But then you say it's got kind of a darker theme. I
Well,
think
that's right.
I've heard that Jake and the Kid is another beloved work by your father there.
That's
So,
it.
what elements of that collection do you find most resonates with Canadian readers today?
Well, that CBC series, it ran as a radio series for 6 years, from 1950 to 56, and then it continually was repeated over the years into the 70s. And that whenever Jake and the Kid came on, it was originally on Sunday afternoons about 4 o'clock. Um, all of Canada tuned in. It was their story, and Jake and the Kid is built to a large extent on the tradition of tall tale telling. And Jake is always telling the kids one tall tale after another, and it's a part of the kids' education. The tall tale is used as a kind of, well, like the fable used to be used, for to teach some kind of moral. And for example, in the Jake and the Kids series, there are at least a dozen scripts which address the racism against our First Nations people. There's a character, Moses' left hand, who appears in that. There's also stories against, there's one very powerful story called Going to a Fire, where the prairies could be very racist about our immigrants, what used to be called DPs. And there's a Ukrainian character who is the brunt of, he and his family are the brunt of some racism. It was such a powerful story. The Minister of Agriculture at the time got in touch with WO and wanted a copy. And the National Film Board made a film documentary called Fires of Envy, and it was used in schools all across Canada as a kind of, um, you know, uh, stories that explore racism and are in such a way they say, look, don't do this. Don't do this to each
Yeah,
other.
yeah. There you go. So there's a lesson right there too. That's so interesting. Okay, so getting back to your own play here, Magic Lies, which was adapted from your dad's biography. So, as a playwright, did you encounter any challenges while developing that play, and how did you overcome them to bring it to the premiere stage?
Okay, so there were one challenge in particular, and Barb is the co-writer. Barb and I are kind of a literary duet. We started doing literary duets some time ago. We did the two volume biography of my father together. So what we realized was that you can't just have a one man show where someone gets up on stage and then tells one story after another. There has to be connective tissue between those stories, and so that when the audience finishes watching that show, they don't go away with, oh, those are some interesting stories. They go away with the sense that the whole of that play was more than just a sum of its parts. So that was tricky, and that's where we used a lot of our biography to weave together and go and flow from one story into another. And Nathan Smith, who plays WO, I tell you, he is absolutely wonderful. He's he, it almost brought tears to our eyes in the audience because he really did succeed in giving the audience an evening with W.O. Mitchell doing his wonderful
Yeah,
storytelling.
and just kind of bringing him back to life. Absolutely. So, finally, what message or experience do you hope that the audience will take away from Magic Lies? And what do you envision as its lasting impact on the Canadian community of theater goers and readers alike?
Well, there are a number of stories in it that have a serious intent, but the thing that we wanted people to go away with was that they had a really fun evening, listening to some wonderful stories told in a very, very engaging way. And at the same time, you see, Dad used to say that his stories, that every bit was the truth, every single bit, character traits and in the characters, sensuous bits in setting scene and so on. All of those are actual true bits and pieces of reality. But what he does as a writer, he weaves them together into a big lie, a magic lie. And it's a magic lie because it helps the reader explore larger universal human truths. And so that's what we hope people will go away with. First, that they have a lot of fun. And in fact, that opening night, that audience was having a lot of fun. They laughed in the right places. And in fact, there's some very moving parts in it. My father used to say, when you tell stories, you want to make them laugh and make them cry. You want to use one against the other in order to gain that powerful effect of people listening to story magic.
Oh, that is so wonderful. And looks like Magic Lies runs from September 15th through October 21st at the Rosebud Opera House stage, right, Ormond?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, all right. Is it going to be showing anywhere else in Canada after that?
Well, we hope that some people, in fact, I got an email this morning from someone in Edmonton, and he said, is this going to be a chance to be set up and played in Edmonton? Because I really want to see this, but Rosebud is a little far. So I sent that on to the Rosebud people and says, have you got any other plans for it? So,
Okay, let them deal with it. Sounds
yeah.
good. Armand, it looks like we're about out of time here, but thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. This was fun.